Death is uncommon, fortunately, because we are durable, and fatal mishaps are rare, but it makes difficult the study of anatomy, especially since many of the accidents serious enough to cause death leave the deceased's remains too damaged for study. If lungs are ruptured when full, the explosive force can tear a body asunder, ripping the titanium as easily as if it were tin. Well, you guys are in the Eastern Bureau of Upper Middlebrow,
the Northeastern Bureau,
Rockhaven,
the Northeastern
Barnard,
Bureau.
Vermont,
yeah, the North.
Silver Lake.
Yeah. That's right, because I bet we
dream.
also have sort of a like mid-Atlantic.
There's the Florida Bureau. There's
right,
the Mid-Atlantic Bureau.
There's the PNW Bureau. There's the
there's the
Southern
Maine
California
Bureau.
There's going to
just
be
like
the Joshua
Lee Houston's
Tree Bureau
parking
at some
lot,
point.
the Joshua Tree Bureau. Yeah, we have a lot of bureaus.
Small Point Bureau.
Small Point
We have a
Bureau.
small-
There you go.
The Small Point Bureau of Small Point Productions.
Small Point. Oh man, and that's where you should buy up all the houses, Justin. If you could somehow, get another $10 million or so.
Yeah, it's just it's like it's World Party all the time.
World Party Senior Edition.
Coming sooner than we might have imagined.
Yeah. Well, I'm going to do a formal welcome here. Welcome, everybody, to Robot Friends Part 2. This time we are joined by friend of the show, Justin Reich, along with Chris Bagg, as always, and me, Jesse Dukes. And this is our second in a loose series of Robot Friends. And this time, so Chris, last time we did Robot Friends, you shared this wonderful novella called The Life Cycle of Software Objects. And we knew we wanted to talk to Justin. We wanted to talk to Justin about AI. And so we decided that we would just go ahead and read that Ted Chiang collection and talk about that. So here we are.
Here we are.
Welcome,
Wonderful
everybody.
to be here.
Yeah, thanks for joining us, Justin Reich. Listeners probably know you from our Neil Stevenson was a flame-kindling kind of guy, Diamond Age digression episode, or they might remember you from our Teacher Stories episode, where we talked about, what was it, Blue Angel? Is that the name of the story? Francine Prose?
Yes, yeah. Yes, yeah. I don't think we read it, but that's that novel.
No, it was a recommendation show. That was your recommendation. I believe I recommended School of Rock. Justin talked about Matilda, and then we had a wonderful digression about both Lolita and Don't Stand So Close to Me by the Police.
Mm-hmm. Where Chris Bagg discovered that Don't Stand So Close to Me is about an overage, underage relationship.
Yeah, well, that is we're going to file that in like the file cabinet of Chris didn't know Miley Cyrus was Billy Cyrus's daughter. Chris didn't know Gwen Stefani was the original front woman of No Doubt. There's
What?
like a whole yep. Name a music thing I'm supposed to know and I don't know it.
Well,
I thought Rock the Casbah was by the Police.
Oh my goodness! But there's nothing to be.
Sharif don't like it.
Yeah, the police don't like it. Law enforcement don't like it. That is funny. Wow.
Yep.
I'm sure there's some things you know about music.
Yeah. There's some real weird off, standard things, but the things I'm supposed to know, I don't.
Which Beatle sang lead on "Love Me Do"?
Oh God, I have no idea.
It's kind of a trick question because it's
Pete
mostly John, but then Paul sings the "Love Me Do," whoa, whoa, love me do, because John's playing the harmonica, so they actually both sing lead on that one. Yeah. Well, anyway, Justin, we're so glad to have you here. I don't know that we need to do a recap. I think so. Well, there are several stories in this collection. I would say I want to start by I don't think we need to recap all of them. So can I just start us off by asking, in this collection, by the way, I'm going to make a confession here. I didn't get to the end. I read the first, I think, 5 stories out of 7 or something like that. So apologies for that. But of the ones you read, what was your favorite story in this collection? Oh, did Chris Bagg go dark?
Oh no, I'm here.
Okay.
I was waiting for I was in the sort of guest goes.
Oh, we got to
first.
roll. We got to roll for initiative.
I was
Roll
I
for
was I
initiative.
was thinking that that guest goes first, but I like rolling for initiative. It's always
roll a die. Wait, is it roll a die? Let's do D10.
If I just put 1d20 into...
Cool.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I got a 16.
Ooh, that's pretty good.
Oh, here we go. 10.
16.
Oh,
Roll off.
Roll off.
Roll off. Roll off.
Roll off. Roll again. Second roll, 19.
9.
Oh!
Ooh, I beat you bad.
That
Bad.
goes Jesse Justin Bag.
Yes. All right. Well, I will just say that my favorite, while I very much liked, all the stories really, and I very much liked the one called Exhalation. My favorite one was, in fact, the one, Chris, that you read from last time, the life cycle of software objects. There is a creeping horror to that story that reminds me of Never Let Me Go. And there's a series of decisions made by nobody who is a monster, at least none of the protagonists. There is some monstrous behavior in the story that just leads to increasingly difficult situations and compromises in a way that I found brilliant and painful and wonderful. So that one was my favorite. What about you, Justin?
Well, that one was striking to me because it's such an incredible investigation of human development. Of course, human development reflected through artificially intelligent beings, but just a really thoughtful examination of development, which is kind of my jam. But I think I was most transported by the first story, The Merchant and the Alchemist's Gate, which is a story of a merchant in Baghdad and Cairo who is capable of sending people back in time, with the caveat that they cannot change the past at all, that both the past and the future are fixed. And all they can do is kind of bear witness to things that were already fated to happen and discover these things fated to happen, and maybe discover a little bit more about events from a different perspective.
Arrive at a deeper understanding of the past and the future.
All you can do is arrive at a new understanding of what you already knew to be.
Right.
But the language in it of this very sort of flourishing politeness amongst all the peoples was just it was enchanting. And so you have this enchanting dialogue and this really interesting idea in this beautifully conceived world. And it was just very pleasurable.
The thing I loved the most about that one is that the people who are doing the time traveling can't affect events, but very often the people that they go to see affect the events in sort of inexorable ways. Like they go and meet their future person, and the future person is like, walk on the other side of the street when you go back, which then creates this very interesting loop of like, what is the nature of time? And is there, like the story posits that there isn't free will because the characters are kind of playing out what their younger selves are supposed to do. And it's just it's such a fantastic retreating of the whole time travel paradox.
I loved it.
Especially since the collection ends with a story about prisms, which are these devices that take advantage of the fracturing of the timeline into a multiverse, but let people communicate across multiverses, particularly with alternative versions of themselves. So Ted Chiang does sort of the full gamut of there is only one timeline to there are all the timelines and we can talk across them.
Yeah, he's really like finding a solution to the time travel problem through like a series of like big ideas, which is what I love about this book. It's just like a wildly inventive book. I loved Exhalation. I loved the title story mostly because the prose is so wonderfully stilted and strange.
Very Victorian, very
like
it's like reading Frankenstein. Well, we haven't read Frankenstein, but that's what I imagine Frankenstein reads like. But other sort of epistolary novels from the 1890s, it has that kind of feel to.
Yeah, and the reading and the observation that I have like incorporates some old timey stuff, but love how mechanical the prose is, because
Yeah.
the characters in it are basically, sentient robots. And it does have a very sort of formal, stilted way of talking. And yet the robots are struggling with the same issues that, humankind does. That, like, entropy is eventually a big problem.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
One of the things I loved about that story was that a lot of it takes place with a robot that is dissecting itself.
Yes.
Using a complicated series of mirrors and devices to be able to take apart his own brain from the back. It's a species of robots that doesn't know very much about themselves because they didn't invent themselves, and they have to do a lot of scientific research to maintain themselves. So there's this like very precise description of what's happening inside their body, what the room looks like, what the machinery looks like. But at various other points, he's like, well, I've been to the end of the world where you see the giant cobalt wall that goes up as far as you can see. And it's a like moment of world building, which opens a zillion questions,
Right. Which are never answered.
Barely described, right. Especially in contrast to this very precisely described section. So you know some of the rules of the worlds he's building, but these like crazy things are completely waved away,
Yep.
Back in favor of okay, what's happening inside the equivalent of neurons inside my brain and so forth.
I think that story succeeds in that. At first, I'm struggling with the mystery of what are these beings? What do they look like? Who created them? Why are they here? I think that's the mystery. But more and more, this character who dissects himself, his exploration of the metaphysical, I guess, both sadness and nobility of their inevitable death and sort of heat death. In their case, it's not so much heat death, it's pneumatic death. Because they are powered by air, and eventually the air will stop moving. Mm-hmm. It won't go away, but there will no longer be any air pressure differential, and so they have an entropy death like the one our civilization is headed for in several 100 billion years or something like that.
It's going to take a while.
Know. It's going to take a while. That the poetics of that, I stopped wondering about the origin of that creature, just because the poetry of its reckoning with its own mortality became more important to me than the world-building mysteries that were sort of established at the beginning of that story. And I thought that was amazing.
Yeah, Ted Chiang's ability to hold to the thread of what's important in the story is unparalleled. Like his ability, which is even more impressive given his subject material, because he picks big, wild, strange, eclectic things that you would think would take a lot of explication. But he's like, nope, like big, infinite cobalt wall. Cool. Bye. Not totally pertinent to what we're talking about.
I don't think I've ever read a writer better at emotionalizing the big practical philosophical questions. I can't think of one.
In a really concrete scene.
Right.
In like an interaction between a couple of characters, a father and a daughter.
Father and a daughter, a mother and her adopted digiant, or whatever it might be. Adopted. What was that face, Chris? Were you disagreeing, or were you just
not
wincing
disagreeing.
with pain?
That story, the Digiant it's so.
Oh, it's heartbreaking.
Oh, it is so sad watching that Digiant grow up, and oh my gosh, yes, very difficult.
The moment, but there are a couple moments. So most of this book I read as an audiobook driving first from Pennsylvania to Scarsdale, New York, and then from Scarsdale to New York to Vermont, where I am right now with Justin. In Upper Middlebrow's Northeastern Bureau. And there are certain geographical locations where if I visit them again, I will immediately be struck by the scene that I read in those particular places. One of which is in The Alchemist in the Merchant at the Alchemist's Gate, I think is the title.
Yep.
In that story, the moment that the merchant gets the message from the woman who attended to his dead wife 20 years before the events of most of the story, and he learns that her final thoughts were with him. I was somewhere in East Brunswick, New Jersey, like near a manufacturing or packaging plant, and if I ever drive there again, I'll just start crying.
Yeah.
You know, because of that. Also, the moment in the life cycle of, there were a number of moments like that in that book, but probably the most profound one, unfortunately, was the moment where the Pordigians have to watch one of their number being tortured in a video. And I was like, where does that guy live? I want to drive to his house and beat him to death with a baseball bat. You know, that was, I had this incredibly violent reaction to this incredibly violent sort of speculative thing that I was imagining at that moment. And there were a number of moments of like that in this collection. I'm incredibly impressed.
Yeah,
by that capacity.
He does. You know, like another, like I kept thinking, especially during Exhalation, but during a lot of this stuff, of the Tom Stoppard play Arcadia, which also deals with the end of the world through entropy, but cycles back and forth between a present day research project in the English countryside and early 19th century English, the same room in the early 19th century English countryside, where like Byron is hanging around, and there's like a lot of like sex and stuff like that, but
there's a hermit.
There is a hermit. Yes. The main spoilers. The main character Septimus Hodge eventually becomes the Mad Hermit, and the same like emotional intensity with these very, very big abstract ideas. You know, like Stoppard is another guy who can pull off stuff like this. You know, I mean, like Rosencrantz and Guildenstern Are Dead is probably the greatest example of like huge ideas coupled with like a very sad buddy movie.
Yeah, I always just imagine like young Gary Oldman and young Tim Roth playing racquetball.
Yes. Yes.
That's always the image that comes to me when I think of that movie, which it's an excellent play and an excellent movie too. And Hamlet sort of wandering around muttering to himself, you know, off in the distance, and the two being like, what's wrong with him? He seems depressed.
Yeah.
Well, you have a reading, right?
I do. I've got a reading from Exhalation. And then I have a little like show and tell based off of it. Yeah, so this is just 2 paragraphs from page 40, and early in the story, and the narrator is talking about the nature of him and his species. Death is uncommon, fortunately, because we are durable, and fatal mishaps are rare, but it makes difficult the study of anatomy, especially since many of the accidents serious enough to cause death leave the deceased's remains too damaged for study. If lungs are ruptured when full, the explosive force can tear a body asunder, ripping the titanium as easily as if it were tin. In the past, anatomists focused their attention on the limbs, which were the most likely to survive intact. During the first anatomy lecture I attended a century ago, the lecturer showed us a severed arm, the casing removed to reveal the dense column of rods and pistons within. I can vividly recall the way, after he had connected its arterial hoses to a wall-mounted lung he kept in the laboratory, he was able to manipulate the actuating rods that protruded from the arm's ragged base, and in response the hand would open and close fitfully. In the intervening years, our field has advanced to the point where anatomists are able to repair damaged limbs and, on occasion, attach a severed limb. At the same time, we have become capable of studying the physiology of the living. I have given a version of that first lecture I saw, during which I opened the casing of my own arm and directed my students' attention to the rods that contracted and extended when I wiggled my fingers. Let's see, Jesse, do you have, am I able to share? Could you turn sharing on? And we'll put this.
I think I know what you're going to share. I'm going to just take it. Does it rhyme with Parmaggio?
Oh, no, but you're on the right track.
Okay. You should be able to share now.
Okay.
I am prepared to be completely surprised.
Okay, well, that's all right. You could...
I mean, if I had to guess, just based on
does it rhyme
priors,
with Duke Byskocker?
or Wig Jagowski.
Wow, no, it does not.
Because I will admit that I immediately thought of the penultimate scene of Empire Strikes Back.
No.
Where Luke gets his new arm, and we can see the pistons and rods moving.
Well,
yeah.
this is probably
Classic.
also that is also probably a reference to this, which is a Rembrandt.
That's what I thought.
painting.
Isn't that Caravaggio?
It's Rembrandt. I'm sorry.
Oh,
Yeah.
I mean, you were in the right century.
This
You were in the
was
right...
the image I was.
This was
thinking
what you were
of.
thinking of. Yeah.
I thought it was Caravaggio.
You know, if it was Caravaggio, there'd be a lot more blood. There'd be a lot more shadow. There'd be a lot more like, but.
The dead guy's face would be Caravaggio's face.
Yeah, exactly. The dead guy's face wouldn't be like very well rendered. This is a convict.
Actually, the dead guy's face is Rembrandt, isn't it?
I could see that. Yeah, I think.
Or Van Gogh.
He's also Rembrandt is pictured as the person giving the lecture here, and you can see that what he is.
Somebody should probably describe the picture for our listeners.
Yes. So this is the anatomy lesson by Rembrandt. There is a dead body that is on an operating table. The way that you got cadavers in Rembrandt's time was you just went on down to the prison and got a body that had just been recently hanged, which made me think of this particular story.
Like bribed the hangman, or...
Yeah, something like that. Like, I'm sure there's some way to play fast and loose with it. But just like in the story, they're talking about it's sort of difficult to have ways to experiment. And like these days, we have imaging and stuff like that makes it a lot easier. But in this case, they're like, well, no, we got to go like get a recently deceased body. There is a physician who is doing the dissection. The patient's left arm is splayed open, and we can see tendons and everything like that. And there are a bunch of Burgermeisters kind of like crowded around the table, some of which do look a lot like Rembrandt himself. But when you look a little closer, like other than the like sheer genius of Rembrandt and where the light is and where your eye goes, there's some funny things. Like the arm that is being dissected is flipped in the wrong direction. That is not where your left thumb would be if it were lying on the table. It's basically a right hand. It's a right arm that Rembrandt has transposed over to the other side. It's also wildly out of proportion with the other arm. It is like much longer. So there's a lot of like funny, like sleight of hand.
It reaches down to his mid-thigh.
Yeah. And his other arm almost makes it to his hip, and that's it.
Yeah.
And so there's some like problems with it, but it's there in service of the explication of the anatomy. And I think that Ted Chiang, like the language of this passage is so clearly evocative of this painting that I think he's playing around with the same ideas about like what does anatomy even mean? And like, how does it function and how do we play with it? And I just think it's so fantastically impressive that we're reading this like ostensibly sci-fi book, and it can he can talk in both directions, future and past, in a similar way as the first story of the book. But yeah,
thinking back on how, as soon as Chris read the first words of that passage, which often happens when you guys pick readings, I was like, oh yeah, that's one of the most evocative passages in the whole book. And what great pleasure I took from that passage, either with no knowledge or no memory of the anatomy lesson painting. Like if you don't get, sometimes like there are illusions or such where if you don't get the illusion, you're like, there's something there, I'm not quite sure. Whereas this was like, it's every bit as, maybe not quite, it's almost as delightful without knowing that reference from which it comes. In part because it's just an incredibly believable scene. I guess if you know enough about like the history of medicine and to know that, I mean, like I think there is a medical tradition of vivisection, of self-experimentation, of things like that he taps into.
Yeah.
But also just imagining all of the students peering into your robot professor's popped open arm. It's terrific.
There are two literary antecedents I can think of, and there's maybe another one too that's sort of at the edge of my consciousness, but I did not particularly like Neil Stephenson's Baroque cycle, but one of my favorite things about those three very long novels was the descriptions of the Royal Society, in particular Newton and Hooke. And Newton is a major character. Isaac Newton is a major character. And at one point, there's a description of him shoving a knitting needle into his eye socket around, not penetrating any flesh, but kind of like wedging it between the eyelid and the eyeball, and then distending the shape of his eyeball and then measuring how that affects his vision.
Oh my God.
Which is apparently really true. And then there was Hooke, who, as Justin noted, did a lot of vivisection of dogs, which was really quite horrific, but in the service of being a very proficient surgeon, and one of the very first proficient surgeons. The other literary antecedent I detected in this is a character that Chris Bagg, I hope you and I explore sometime in this podcast, is Dr. Stephen Matrin, the companion to Jack Aubrey in the Patrick O'Brian Aubrey Matrin novels. It's the sort of experiment that the protagonist of that story performs on himself felt like something Matrin would do in the course of those books as well. It reminded me a little bit of Stephen in a kind of funny way. And I wouldn't be surprised if Ted Chiang hadn't read both of the things I just mentioned.
Yeah. Yeah, he's got the feeling of one of those authors who has read
read a lot. Yeah, he's read a lot. My question, sort of to both of you, but I think I want to start with Justin, is one of the interesting choices about the life cycle of software objects is it starts with the premise that it is possible to create something like artificial general intelligence, AGI, which is what all the AI development companies are trying to build right now. And many of them feel like they're right around the corner from this. They think they're going to have built essentially a smart AI that has the consciousness and the intelligence of a human being, plus all the things that artificial intelligence is already better at us at, like accessing, millions of terabytes, all the information in the world instantly, and analyzing it instantly, and running complex mathematical. Combine that with the wisdom and the self-consciousness and the moral intelligence of a human being, and you get artificial general intelligence. And Silicon Valley is literally right now, tens, if not hundreds of billions of dollars are being deployed to build this technology. I don't actually think it's around the corner, because I believe that their efforts are based on large language models, which are predictive, not thought-based. But Ted Chiang is positing a future in which it is possible to build something like that. But in this future, the way you do it is build an intelligence with consciousness that is not actually very intelligent off the bat, and then needs to be trained or taught by a trainer or teacher for something like 20 years to fully realize its intelligence. And so these are the Digiants. And we first meet the Digiants. They have the intelligence of something like a 2-year-old, right? They can kind of talk baby talk. And at one point, we witnessed one of them being transferred from kind of the metaverse. What do they call it? Real space or something like that? Or they have some name for this kind of virtual...
Data Earth.
Data Earth. Transferred from Data Earth into a real world mechanical robot. And it's just like, wow, the sun is very bright. Whoa, this is weird. Oh, look at you. I know you, but now I can see the tiny little holes in your skin, referring to Anna, the sort of motherly character. And the premise of the story is based on the idea that if these Digiants are attended to with a sort of attention that human parents provide to children, in roughly the same amount of time, about 2 decades, that you could have something that eventually achieves the intelligence of an adult. Something like artificial general intelligence, although that doesn't really happen in a 20-year period, but at least that's the idea. And I'm just curious what you both make of that premise, both in the literary sense. How does it work as a storytelling premise, but also how plausible does that feel to you, like in a real world sense? Is Ted Chiang's, and part of the reason I ask this too is that recently this book was written in something like 2019.
Yeah.
Since then, we had this incredible jump in the capacity of large language models in AI. We saw ChatGPT or GPT 3.5 emerge about 2 years ago. This artificial intelligence based on large language models that does a really impressive job emulating human communication, written communication or speech. And so nowadays we might be trained to think that any AI that we build, once the sort of the software model has been created, that it would not really need much training to become intelligent. Like they'll just build the model and it will just be super smart. But this story is suggesting that we would build something like an AI infant, and then over decades, similar to a human, it would develop into a conscious and smarter super intelligence. And so, Justin, maybe you can start, but I'm curious what you both think about that.
Well, as a literary premise, I think one of the great things it does is lets the author probe into different stages of development and identify the different moral quandaries that happen, towards the end. There's a question of like, what should the sexuality of digients be? Should they be restricted not having sexuality as they are approaching, like a sort of, Jewishish adulthood, or, some cultures kind of adulthood in the early teens. There's the question of emancipation emerges. And some of the questions are treated in some ways exactly like human beings. When am I old enough to be on my own? What it will mean for when I'm on my own is that I can make choices that you would not make, of which a significant fraction are bad choices. Right. But that's what it means to be on your own. So some of these are like sort of universal parenting things, then combined with the different capacities of digients, of things like, one of the things they do a bunch with digients periodically is they call it rolling them back, basically taking their mental state to a previous save point, which happens famously pretty early on in the story when one of them learns a curse word by accident, right as they're getting ready to be released. And so they just say, take all the digients and roll them back 3 days from before they accidentally overheard that curse word, and then we'll just let them go. And then, which lets you do a bunch of things like, which actually, I think is analogous to some of the things that we're trying to work through now, are like, all right, so this is a thing which has a different set of capacities. Should we draw from some kind of human analogy, like, restricting development of humans is bad, like a thing like rollback in humans is bad, don't do that thing. Or look, this is just a different entity, and so we need to treat it kind of differently. And so that creates this incredible opportunities for a series of great sort of zooming in on difficult developmental moments and predicting how they might be the same with non-human entities, and also how they might be quite different. Then from like a sort of scientific point of view, one of the things I love about this is that some of the earliest research that was called artificial intelligence was conducted at MIT, and it was famously in the service, well, I wish it was more famously, but it was very much in the service of understanding human intelligence. Like a bunch of guys, and they were all guys, sat around and said, let's build machines that do things like thinking, because if we can make machines do things like thinking, then we might be able to understand our own thinking better. This has now been sort of like one of the kind of first theories that was deployed from this was a very strange thing about large language models is the way they generate text is they just, given a sequence of words, they predict the next word. They've printed out 10 words and they're just going to predict the next one. And even when text looks really planned, so you'll ask it to write a sestina or a poem with a particular structure, and you think it must have planned out the structure, it must have planned out the last couplet, but it can't. It has no mechanic to do that. All it can do is predict words in a sequence, but it does it in a way that fulfills the structure, which presumably every human being would do with some degree of planning. But, there are a bunch of linguists who are out there now who are like, maybe human speech is a bit more predicting predicting the next word given a sequence more than we think it is.
Maybe we're LLMs and we don't know it.
maybe our thinking is more like LLMs than we thought. There's some degree to which we will assuredly do that, because one of the things humans love to do is to take new technologies and to to analogize the features of that new technology onto the brain. So the brain's a machine, the brain's a piston, the brain's a calculator, the brain's a computer, the brain is a network. Now the brain is going to be a large language model. But I love, the thing I love about this story is that it seems very connected to those scientific roots of there's this real back and forth between using human intelligence to understand artificial intelligence, using artificial intelligence to more deeply understand human intelligence.
I just have a question, Justin, and maybe, we don't have the answer for this, or we don't, but, you said that some linguists are positing maybe we do think in ways that are kind of predictive. What are some of the general theories about human cogitation? Like, do we have ideas about how we think?
Yeah, well, so
it's an argument. It's an old argument that linguists have had for a long time about the difference between thought and language. But maybe you know more about it than I do, Justin. I know a little bit about it.
I would say, well, let's see. About that particular domain, I don't know very much. General models of how we solve problems. There's one pretty well accepted one in education. So one thing about to me, what the human brain does is beyond our capacity to understand. And so we create models, which are simplifications of what the brain does in order to make sense of some particular situation. And they work well in some situations and not well in others. In education, you might call one of the well-known ones cognitive load theory.
Okay.
And the crucial, there's cognitive load theory says the brain has three parts. You take in sensory information. The sensory information is passed through working memory, and then it's put into long-term memory. The brilliance of long-term memory is, as far as we know, it's infinite. You cannot, we do not have a way of telling how much people can know, but every time we've tested it, we can't find any limits to the amount of stuff that a person can memorize. The amount of stuff you can think about at any given time is very, very narrow. It's, people used to say 7 items, more like, maybe like 3 or 4 things. It doesn't seem to vary that much between people. It's this sort of wonderful kind of universal human phenomenon. So we have this model of intelligence, which says you sense things in the world, you pass them through working memory, you store them in long-term memory. Sometimes you forget them, but you remember a lot of them. When you need something, you pull it from long-term memory back into working memory. Because working in education, because working memory is limited, a big thing you want to do as instructors, create environments in which you're not creating cognitive load on that working memory. So that's like a whole series of empirically validated models of how the brain and how thinking works. However, to me, when you get down to the level of there's a bunch of chemicals and electrical signals sloshing around in your head, and what exactly are they doing that produces thought? I think we basically don't know. In the same way, actually, that if you go to the best computer scientists in the world and say, why does this operation that we've created of predicting the next token given a series of tokens work? They don't know either. They're both sort of epiphenomenon. They're both you can describe the underlying phenomenon. We can tell you exactly the lines of code that were put into an LLM. We can tell you the exact molecular structure of stuff that's happening in the brain, and we can describe a bunch of stuff that's happening. But how you get computers that emulate language, or how you get, the example I like to use is I can say Barney and you will think of a big purple dinosaur, and no one can tell you where in your head exactly the big purple dinosaur is, or how that big purple dinosaur is encoded, or where you would lose it. There are things we know about it, much like there's things we know about LMs, but there's no one who can give you the sort of very precise mechanistic deterministic model of, in the way that sort of Exhalation does a little bit, of saying you just balance the air flowing through these gold leaves, and it's the functional equivalent of a set of bits, and that's how you get that thing. So that's my riff on what we know about thinking and the limits of what we know about thinking.
As a anthropology major, which is something that almost never comes in handy in my life, I do sort of vaguely recall that the Sapir-Whorf hypothesis was the hypothesis that language determines how we think, although Sapir was more deterministic. Oh, no, sorry. I believe Worf was, one of them was more deterministic and the other one wasn't. So one of them thought that our language determines how we think, and the other one thought our language influences how we think. But then there have been a number of scientists that have done animal studies that demonstrate animals in certain cases are capable of non-linguistic thought. And so actually, Chris, you may not be aware of this, but an experiment that I did for the work that Justin and I are collaborating on, I challenged DALL-E to draw an image. DALL-E, which is an AI that generates images. This was something I got from Justin, and Justin got from a lab at Harvard, I believe, to draw an image of a plate on top of a fork. And DALL-E still, it's been 2 years now, still struggles to do this. I've seen some people who experiment with different kind of prompt engineering, and through various prompt engineering can eventually get a image of a plate on top of a fork. I hope I said that the first time. The thing you're trying to get it to draw is a plate on top of a fork. Fork on top of the plate, easy
No problem.
for DALL-E.
Easy. Yeah.
Plate on top of a fork, can't do it. So we can put this in the show notes. I challenged my, at the time, 4.5-year-old nephew to draw a plate on top of a fork. Now, was his plate photorealistic? No. Were his forks photorealistic? No. But what he drew was 2 vertical forks that sort of form column. Not only did he draw a plate on top of a fork, he solved the physics problem by having the forks sort of balanced on a table and supporting the plate, kind of like pillars. You could imagine like Samson knocking the forks out of the way and the plate would collapse. So, my determination there was my nephew is smarter than a $10 billion AI developed by OpenAI, but B, Francis, a 4.5-year-old, knows what a fork is, knows what a plate is, knows what on top is, knows what under is. And the AIs that are doing this predictive language actually still have not connected meaning to those linguistic concepts. So in a way, they have knowledge because they know a lot about patterns. And in some cases, they know more about patterns than you and I do. But they do not know what they're talking about, I think.
Well, they have memory, but they don't have reasoning, and like Justin, that's sort of what I was like getting at with the, like, how do we think question, because, and like, what you're sort of describing is a model that's based on, short-term memory or working memory and long-term memory, but like not an answer to the, like, how the hell does Jesse's 4.5-year-old nephew, like, deal with the concepts of on top of and underneath and balance and what is a plate and all of that stuff. Like, I mean, Jesse, you and I have talked about this before, the E.M. Forrester thing about the way that you read a book is with, you combine, so intelligence, he describes it as intelligence as the bright line that passes along the text. And that bright line is doing all sorts of things like making connections and understanding what's going on. But then you combine that with your memory of the book that you have already read. And the combination of intelligence plus memory makes for a cohesive reading experience. And it makes it possible to do things like illusion and connection and things that we rely upon to take a book from a series of words on a page, basic. And this is the problem with like AI text, is that it is legible and understandable and it has no heart. There's nothing
Although, occasionally AI text will there are occasional brilliant analogies it comes up with too. Now, why does it do that? Maybe because it's read that analogy somewhere. Or maybe there is something, I mean, when you say, Justin describes the example of writing a sestina without having a plan. Well, maybe it doesn't have a plan, but maybe there's a sort of like Lorentzian attractor, that in being able to predict the next word, contained in that prediction is the structure of the sestina that AI is grappling towards in some way. And but we don't have a theory about that right now. I suspect there will be. I want to do a quick reading inspired by something Justin said earlier about how the life cycle of software objects and the challenges of our two protagonists, Derek and Anna, in many ways mirror the challenges of just ordinary human parenting. So this is a moment where...
Can I recap that Derek and Anna are two former employees of the firm that made Digient. They adopted Digients, and then when most of the world has moved on and has suspended their Digients, Derek and Anna are two of the very last folks to be trying to continue to raise their Digients in a world that has either moved on or to other artificial intelligent life forms or to other things in general.
And suspension is a kind of euthanasia. It could be temporary, it could be permanent. It's painless, it's not torture, but it is, either forever or for temporarily ending their consciousness. So Derek has adopted Marco and Polo. Polo is a clone or a copy of Marco.
So interesting. God.
The issue here is that this is complicated to explain, but essentially to keep the Digients going, they need a lot of money because they need money to build an environment for the Digients to live in virtually. And the habitat that the Digients had that had been created by their company, the company's gone belly up. So that habitat is gone. So they need a lot of money essentially to generate or port this virtual habitat into the current computer infrastructure that exists that could support it. And one of the ways they could get the money would be allowing the Digients to become... There's a company that has a pitch on the table that essentially wants the Digients to become sex workers. And this particular company, they didn't really think they were going to even want to hear the pitch, but the company paid them to listen to the pitch. And the advantage of this company over others is that the company does seem to really respect the Digients' consent. And the goal the company has is for the Digients to want to be sex partners for its clients, to enjoy sex. And so they want to basically rewire the Digients to learn how to enjoy sexual activity, to develop erogenous zones. It's creepy because probably this proposal would have been rejected outright if this community of people trying to keep the Digients alive didn't need money in order to do that. But they do. So they're considering this proposal. And the Digients know about it. And Polo and Marco are suggesting that maybe they want to go through this procedure to allow this company to sexualize them, to make them sexual beings. And they're having a kind of an argument about it with Derek. And one of the things that Derek has said is that one day he's going to allow them to become independent. Ironically, the way that a Digient can become independent is by being made into a corporation, because corporations are people. And if you make a Digient a corporation, it derives the right of an individual and it can make its own decisions. So it starts with, they're having this argument, and it's going to start with Marco, who says, "When I corporation, I free make own mistakes," says Marco. "That whole point. You're not ready to be a corporation yet. Because you not like my decisions? Ready mean always agree with you? If you're planning on editing your own reward map as soon as you're a corporation, you're not ready." "I not said want," said Marco emphatically. "I don't want. I said when corporation, I free do that. That different." Derek stops for a moment. It's easy to forget, but this is the same conclusion the user group came to during forum discussions about incorporating the Digients. If legal personhood is to be more than a form of wordplay, it has to mean granting a Digient some degree of autonomy. Yes, you're right. When you're a corporation, you'll be free to do things that I think are mistakes. "Good," says Marco, satisfied. "When you decide I ready, it not because I agree you, it can be ready even if I not agree you." "That's right. But please tell me you don't want to edit your own reward map." "No, I know dangerous. Might make mistake that stops self from fixing mistake." He's relieved. "Thank you." So human, right?
Oh my God. Like the problem with this book is that the philosophical issues just keep ramifying. Everything just keeps getting bigger. And you're like, fuck, what do we do? We've lost.
Yeah, but I mean, even in that moment too, like Marco is completely right, Which is like, if you're gonna free me, if you're gonna give me independence, you're not gonna always agree with my decision. And that Derek, who's in the parent, is like, well, if you think you're ready to, have this surgery procedure on you, I don't think you're ready to be your own person. And Marco says, if I'm ready to be my own person, it's going to be my decision. And then Marco has to agree with him, but then there's just this desperation. You're right, but please don't do it. And they're both right? And you can completely empathize with Derek in that situation. But it's such a wonderful real relationship that this fictitious character is having with this digital being.
And it's why the 20-year narrative span is so crucial, because you could, there's some discussion of this when the Digiants are, the equivalent of 6 or 7 or something like that. And it's like, oh yeah, that's kind of an interesting problem. But when you're right, when the Digiant is right on the cusp of being in that space, which societies across history and time and space have not agreed upon.
Yeah.
But it's like somewhere between 13 and 25 is when you get to become your own person. And the reason why that huge span exists across cultures is that we're not sure. There are trade-offs within that whole range. And it's probably a little different. One thing that we as human parents have a huge advantage of is at least we have millennia of people who have sort of tried to do the thing that we've done before. And some of the trade-offs are well known. If you're raising an entity which has never existed before, you're in, it's harder to know what the costs and benefits of a decision like that will be.
Yeah, which is like, we're doing this like gigantic social experiment with AI at the moment without real like guardrails. And just, basically driven, as a lot of things, by market forces instead of, like reasoned thinking. To just bridge over to, current events, like, Meta revoked fact checking the other day. And like there's an example of like a software lifecycle problem that doesn't fit the human experience lifecycle.
Yeah, I mean, that's a problem. I mean, I am constantly dealing with software that worked really, really well 5 years ago, and then just the company decides it's not going to support it anymore, or the company goes out of business. I love the way this particular problem was dramatized, though, because you could imagine, and this story has been told, like maybe in The Velveteen Rabbit and Toy Story 2 and other places, I think Clara and the Sun, where you could imagine Digiants all sort of like in robotic bodies living homeless somewhere, in an alley, like begging for oil, or begging to be charged and things like that. And that's, in this sort of Dickensian hellscape. And that's plausible too, although this world shoves that aside because we can humanely suspend them, and so the people... There were probably thousands, if not tens of thousands of people who bought Digiants, realized they couldn't handle them and put them in suspension. And that's sad, but it doesn't torture them. It's euthanasia. But by choosing the 20 or so people who really want to keep the Digiants alive and their dilemmas, and they see a value in these creatures that have been created by this corporation that no longer exists, and all the dilemmas they have to face and the trade-offs they have to make and the sacrifices they have to make, I think it dramatizes the implications that not terribly evil corporation made when it chose to make these pets. It behaved more or less ethically. It created chips for them so they couldn't be tortured. It had some ethical guardrails. It's kind of like Facebook in that regard, or Twitter. There are people there trying to do the right thing, or Google. But there's just something baked into the system that leads to unforeseen and unwanted consequences that these poor creatures and these poor humans have to deal with.
Yeah, I mean, like all of literary history is speckled with, like Frankenstein, Pygmalion,
right.
Pinocchio. But I think the question that this story really raises is like, what is our responsibility to consciousness? Which, like, what the hell? That's a very large question. Like, when we create consciousness, like, what do we do with it? Because that's not really a thing that has been done, at least on our planet. And we're right at the moment, or, you know, probably more like, you know, we're not a few years away from general intelligence, but, like, you know,
we might be decades away. We might be centuries away. I mean, I think and Ted Chiang thinks it's possible. I think it's possible. I don't think we're as close to it as the Silicon Valley, but yeah, it is a possibility, and we should.
One thing that the contemporary turn of LLMs, I think, makes work less well in this novel is the baby speech of young Digians. Because I think, you know, sort of post GPTs, it would now be expected that like a new consciousness would have
ChatGPT like in its brain,
the literary skills of all of humanity, as expressed through predictive text algorithms, but probably like the moral reasoning and other kinds of developmental features. They would have a bunch of developmental features of infants and toddlers masked by fully proficient communication in all languages that have an internet, you know, base.
Which is
like
well, talk about like one of those. You know, like Justin, you mentioned bodies earlier, and
well, I don't know the precise history of this, but I think it goes back quite a bit that people building artificial intelligences realized that you would be able to accelerate the acquisition of, let's call it, textual knowledge way faster and at way greater scales than sensory knowledge. And this is a really interesting question in development. So in human development, you get a few years of, you know, quite a bit of sensory exposure, intelligence. You see things, you parse faces, you touch the landscape, you
walk,
move your own body through space, you flail your arms around, you wiggle your fingers, you get tickled, but also someone's probably talking to you the whole time. But then eventually you learn letters and numbers and can read, and so your development is this combination of either oral or written information plus your own sensory exposure. I think even to this day, there's a general assumption that artificial intelligence will have very limited capacity to sense. That we're ramping up knowledge acquisition. We can basically take the entire internet and how much information's in there and shove it into a machine, a model. But it will still, essentially imagine an infant that's born with access to all the writings of humanity, but still doesn't know, what the grass feels like. And Ted Chiang manages this brilliantly. By midway through the Digient's development, there's another company that creates a physical robot that operates in the real world, not in a digital space, that you can put the Digients into. And this creates the first moments of sensory learning in the real world, which Jesse described a little bit before, where, Jax, Anna's Digient, notices the hair standing up on her real arms, the pores in her face, that she has a body which is different than her avatar, and has to explain you can't really change that body, that they go out and, they literally touch grass, are afraid of the sun and the light and things like that. And, it's a fabulous moment, a fabulous scene, but it's really wrestling with this long-standing question in artificial intelligence of what is the role of, we have some developmental psychologists have some sense of the role of sensory information in human development and the importance of that. And, we're positing the creation of these artificial intelligences that we're pretty sure are not going to have the same sensory capacities as humans do. And so what does that mean?
Yeah, what a terrifying idea of so much brain power, so much brain storage, and such limited processing power. That's not, and that's where, that's why literary devices about these subjects are prevalent and just keep coming up and have come up since Greek times, since we started really writing things down and recording them and stuff like that, of, the moment when the Pinocchio or the statue or the monster starts trying, starts interacting with the real world, that's always the really like hot moment of the story. Because, we can't remember that. Like, we don't remember that for ourselves. Like, we don't remember that awakening of consciousness, really. Like, it happened for us and the information's in there, but we can't remember it. And so it is pleasurable to dramatize these moments in all of their, like, possible joy and possible horror. But gosh, the idea, Justin, of an infant with infinite processing power and zero sensory ability is scary.
Seems like a bad idea.
Seems like a bad idea. Yes, to unparaphrase Hunter S. Thompson, it didn't seem like a good idea at the time.
Okay, so here's a unrelated question, or maybe slightly related. In this novella, one of the subplots is the romantic attraction between one of the protagonists to the other. So Derek is attracted to Anna, and Derek starts out married, and then Anna is single or dating people. And then at one point, Derek's wife thinks he has a crush on Anna, but he says that's not true. But a few years later, he has to admit it is true. And then later, Derek and his wife get a divorce. And Derek is aware that it would be wrong for him to want that to lead to a relationship with Anna, but he can't help himself. And and towards the end, we get a sense that he still has feelings for Anna. They're probably not returned. She's in a long-term relationship with another guy, and it's this kind of sub-theme. It's a subplot throughout the entire story. I'm curious, what purpose do you think that romantic subplot serves?
I've got an answer, but Justin, you're our guest.
No, I want to hear Chris's. Okay. This is the further you get from developmental psychology, the less I can understand what's going on.
Me no like love.
me no understand writer. Think Eric and Derek and Anna cute.
I think, and like so much of Ted Chiang's writing functions as this like incredibly intricate and amazing equation. Like everything feels very balanced, and yet he still manages a lyricism that's really impressive and hard to pull off. This messy, incredibly human, incredibly like, this happens all the time. This is human nature. This is like the shit. No, I don't have a crush on that person. Yes, I do. Okay, we got to get a divorce. Oh my God, that's a mess. Now that I'm divorced, do I actually admit this to this person? And so we have this incredibly human, very recognizable, very trite subplot. Like it wouldn't survive on its own as a piece of literary plotting. But it's the necessary backdrop to this like very interesting thing that's happening with the Digients, which is again recognizable in terms of like parenthood and childhood and stuff like that, but is also really new because of all of the technology that's going on. So I think in order to make us really care about the non-Digient characters, we need this romantic subplot to exist to remind us that the humans are human. They're very human. They're fallible. They're messy. They fuck stuff up. And the Digients are still messy, but they are still code, and like, so I think that that's probably important. And I bet that if you went and looked at any of these stories, like, I don't know, is Geppetto's life falling apart? Probably. He's like this dude who lives alone and makes toys in a boat. He talks to crickets. I think you need that messiness to contrast the sort of the not cleanliness, but the very ordered world of the software.
I think it tees up nicely the later debate over like whether or not Digients should be admitted to the sort of sexual world, because in a wonderfully ambiguous way of sort of like humans can't even deal with that. And you can argue it as like, well, humans can't deal with that, so what's wrong with letting the Digiants deal with that? Or humans can't deal with that. We can't possibly let the Digiants try to deal with that. Like the same sort of evidence, I think, lends itself to both warrants. I also was just thinking that my father was a big fan of science fiction, and my mother had no interest, and so was always my dad was always had to sort of negotiate to have us watch and do science fiction things. And one of his go-to lines was, "It's a love story." Like Terminator, it's a love story.
It is a love story.
Star Wars, it's a love
They
story.
are all love stories.
And so
They
it's
are
like
all love
one of the
stories.
conventions of sci-fi, because humans like reading about love and relationships, is to have them in
Yeah.
there. Even when the baby robots are growing up, or the giant robot is hunting you, or anything else.
Well, let me take my swing. I have the benefit of Ted Chiang's author notes, which weren't, I think, in the print edition, but are in the audiobook edition. And I'm going to have to paraphrase, but one of the things he says is one of the premises for this story is that the Digiants would learn more effectively if they have a relationship with their trainer. And then he says relationships are hard, and that there are many couples who break up after their first fight, but that for a relationship to succeed, strong relationships involve compromise and in some cases sacrifice. People, in order to be in a relationship, sometimes have to give up other things that they want. And I think at the very end, when Derek chooses to allow Marco to undergo the surgery, which which Marco is asking for, and which Derek has concluded morally is okay, is correct. He's decided that Marco should be allowed to make this decision, even though he doesn't like it and he's very uncomfortable about it. He also has to acknowledge his own stake in this decision. And one of the things about the decision that Marco makes is it means it will keep Anna from having to take a job where she gets this sort of like narcotic patch that will sort of force her to bond with the new Digiants that she's going to be training in this job. So Anna has a job offer. She could get the money that this community needs to take care of the Digiants from this new job. Or one of the Digiants can agree to become sexualized for the sake of this company in order to eventually perhaps be a kind of like professional sex toy or sex worker for this company. And there's a moment where Derek thinks to himself, I'm going to take responsibility for it. I'm not going to let her be angry. And I think what's happening is Derek is giving up on the dream of ever having a romantic relationship with Anna in order to keep Anna from having to take on that job that she doesn't want to take that will compromise her. And essentially, somebody's going to have to compromise. Somebody's going to have to sacrifice. And Derek decides he's going to be the one to sacrifice, and that he's also going to allow Marco to choose to make a sacrifice too. And I think that's what the romantic relationship is setting up that entire time. And that is illustrating our theme, that this relationship, that these people have chosen to be something like parents to the Digiants, and that requires sacrifices. And that ultimately it's both Derek and Marco's sacrifice that leads to not the entirely happy ending, but an ending that will allow Jax and Polo and the other Digiants to go on to a somewhat hopeful future, as will Anna. That's the sacrifice. I believe that Derek knows that Anna will never forgive him for that, and he chooses to accept that. And I think that's where that entire romantic subplot is going. And you said something earlier, Chris, about the mathematical balance of these stories, and I think it's just perfect. Yeah. And I was wondering the entire time, why are we talking about this? Why are we talking about this? But that's the conclusion I reach. But I did, I had the advantage of Ted Chiang's author's note, which he doesn't really talk about that, but there's some clues in that led me to that conclusion.
Well, it's the blood price. We've talked about this so many times.
It's the blood price.
It's the blood price. Like it's always. I mean, like in a certain
the body
kind of
under the
story.
bridge.
Yeah. You gotta, like you dig up the money, you put your brother's body in it, and you go back home.
It's Dr. Grace's shortened lifespan. You know, it's the poor boy in Afghanistan who almost dies or does die, or well, it is the boy who dies. That's all I got. If we want to move to trivia, or does anybody have any other points they want to make at this point?
Shit, trivia. Okay.
I've got trivia. It's okay if
God.
you don't.
I do not have trivia. It's been quite a day over here in the Northwestern Upper Middlebrow Bureau.
All right. Justin, do you have any other points you want to make, or should I go right into trivia?
Let's do trivia.
Okay. One of the fake Digient corporations, one of the fictitious Digient corporations in the life cycle of software objects is called Sophonce, spelled Sofonce. And now, I'm not sure, but I'm pretty sure that's a reference to another entity created by a sci-fi writer who I imagine that Ted Chiang has read and is kind of tributing in this particular moment. So, and I will say that part of the reason is that the spelling is very similar to the spelling of the entity that I'm thinking of. So, is that creation?
Wait, say the entity again. Spell the entity again.
Sophonce, Sophonce. Sophonce.
And what are they again? This is like a spelling bee. You got to rename the word, the definition. I guess
Sophonce
language
is
of origin.
one of the competitors of Blue Gamma. It's another company that makes Digients. There's various moments where the Blue Gamma Neuroblast Digients are compared unfavorably or favorably to the Sophonce Digients. Like the Sophonce company is more successful, but their Digients are less smart. They're like they're easier to take care of, but they're less intelligent, I think is sort of the trade-off. So, and they're referenced throughout the entire story because I don't think Sophonce ever goes out of business. I think there are Sophonce Digients throughout the entire story. So, is the creation that inspired the name of the Sophonce Corporation a character from Isaac Asimov's I, Robot? B, a super artificial intelligence from Cixin Liu's Three Body series? C, the name of a dragon in a Gene Wolfe novel? Or D, a starship from Larry Niven and Jerry Parnell's novel The Moat in God's Eye?
I'm ready.
I've got to guess.
Justin's ready? Okay, so you guys, the way we always usually do this for drama is you chat me the answer, and then I tell you the answer, and then you groan or cheer, depending. So send me an anonymous chat with your answer.
Send it straight to Jesse, not to everyone.
Yeah. Yep.
Not to everyone. That would ruin.
Yes.
That would ruin the whole thing.
Ruin the suspense.
Okay, I've got both of your guesses. You ready for the correct answer?
Yes.
Yes.
The correct answer is B, a super artificial intelligence from Cixin Liu's Three Body series.
Boy, a ding. Is it a double
It's
ding?
a double ding!
Oh my God.
You both got
That is
it.
awesome.
Did
Wow.
you know that, or was that just a guess?
That was a guess for me.
Justin, did you know?
Oh no, I have not long ago read the trilogy, and I was like, so fun. That sounds familiar. Where do I know that?
Yeah.
I don't think I would have recalled it entirely. I think I needed the multiple choice prompts. But as soon as the Sophon in the Three Body Problem is the like one-dimensional technology device that suppresses human development on planet Earth to allow the Trisolarians to have time to catch up to certain elements of the human society.
It's a supercomputer that takes the form of one proton element, but it's been unfolded from the seventh dimension or something like that. So within the seventh dimension, it's like infinitely complex.
But here in this dimension, it's a single proton. That's amazing.
But you can really pack those suckers down in the third dimension.
Well, it's a single proton, but it's also paired with another proton on. Well, I won't go into that because we're going to read.
We're going to
that
read
very
it.
soon.
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah. It is a wonderful device. I would say Sophon is one of my very favorite things about the Three Body.
I'm excited to listen to you two discuss it.
Yeah, I'm excited to read
Yeah.
it. I have not experienced that IP.
Well, anything you want to add before we dive into the credits?
You guys are better than robot friends. You're real friends.
True. We are real friends.
I realized I didn't make a joke about what we are. Maybe we can write that. Upper Middlebrow is a small point production. Chris Begg and Jesse Dukes What are three things we could be? We're the alchemist, the merchant,
and a set of
and
lungs.
what? The rope.
I'm the set of lungs. I lay claim to that one.
And
The cooperatively owned lungs and the button that flashes a second before you press it.
the predictor.
Yeah.
Okay, well, Upper Middlebrow is a small point production. Chris Bagg and Jesse Dukes are the alchemist, the merchant, the predictor, and the cooperatively owned lungs. Music by Ben Pajak. Happy birthday, Ben and Jesse Dukes. Design and website by Chris Bagg. We are supported by Jenny Grieve and our guest tonight, Justin Reich.
And as a reminder, everybody, Jesse and I are both writers and editors, and we can help you with your writing, podcasting, or editing project. You can see some of our portfolios and learn more at our respective websites, chrisbag.com and jessedukes.com. Or you can enroll as a patron at the You Really, Really Like Us tier, as Justin has done, which includes some one-on-one editorial time with one of us or the other, or both. And Justin, where can people find you?
On a glacier in New Zealand.
Yeah, either in Arlington, MIT, Arlington, Massachusetts,
Sometimes
Rockhaven,
Vermont.
and Barnard, Vermont. But you'd probably look for me online at tsl.mit.edu.
Where would somebody look you up if they wanted to go Nordic skating with you?
Oh, well, if you want to go skiing with me, you should join the AMC, the Appalachian Mountain Club Backcountry Ski Committee. And a few times a year, I'll go skiing with those guys and ladies, and they're a super nice group of folks. If you're looking for some backcountry skiing in New England, that's the crew to pair up with.
Backcountry skiing with EdTech Talk the entire time, and Robot Friends.
I was doing trail. This happens all the time. I was doing trail work on the new Chittenden Brook trails, cutting glades for people to ski on. I was hiking up with the guy, and I was like, "What do you do?" He's like, "I used to be a principal in New Bedford." I was like, "Oh, tell me about the school, charter school." Asking him how things are going. He's like, "Well, like the big thing right now is tutoring. They're trying to get all of us to do tutoring. I'll tell you exactly what's going to happen. Like they had some study 6 years ago that was done in some like hothouse place where it worked really well, and they're going to pour a bunch of money into it, and we're all going to do tutoring at the same time, and there's not going to be enough resources, and we're all going to chase it, and it's not going to work." And like, if you read the latest meta-analysis of the effects of tutoring in post-pandemic recovery, that is basically exactly what happened. And so we can certainly do EdTech Talk while we're hiking up Mount Washington or Jay Peak or whatever.
The problem with education research today is not enough people go skiing. Because if they,
it's a huge issue.
Yeah,
it raises serious validity threats to the core ideas.
Well, Justin, thank you so much for joining us. Thank you for your continuing support on Patreon, and for being willing to join us and being our favorite robot friend, our human friend, to talk about robot friends. Well, I don't want to offend Leah. So one of our two favorite
top two
favorite friends to talk about robot friends.
To talk about robot friends.
Our two tied for first human friends to talk about.
It's an honor. It's an honor just to be near the podium.
Yep.